This is new. I saw like a centipede go by. The first bug that you must probably saw me like get up and crush against the wall was an enormous like centipede or millipede or I don't know. And then a couple of earwigs were walking around on the floor around me. Ugh. I don't. I had never. I've lived in 3 boroughs of New York, and I had never seen a cockroach in my entire life. At least I'm dealing with it with strength and grace, right?
October already. We're jumping back into October horror.
Ooh.
I don't know why, but we're doing it again. And this year we're going to try something a little different. Welcome to Split Picks. This year we're talking about some of the horror greats. Because normally we do lesser known stuff. We're going to talk about some of the big guys. So today we're starting with the one that we felt was best to start with, and that's Mr. Tobe Hooper. I'm being joined today by the creaking door, Mr. Bennett Glace. Bennett, how are you today?
Not too bad. It's an appropriately spooky, creepy atmosphere. My apartment is full of bugs. I'm like watching bugs crawl along the wall behind me as we're recording here. So I'm very much in the holiday spirit.
That's a good welcome to a new place, right?
Oh, very much, yeah. It's like coming into a haunted house. It's great.
Yeah, perfect. And we're also being joined by one of the hosts of Synesthesia, Mr. Jim Hickcox. Jim, how are you?
I'm good. I'm planning on giving children Play-Doh this year instead of candy. I don't know if that's mean or fun. I think it's good.
I can think of way worse things.
Yeah, because you can play with it, but you can also, it's like a savory candy. It's like a soft taffy with a salty flavor.
I was just about to say, as someone who used to eat Play-Doh all the friggin' time, hey, you could do a lot worse than Play-Doh.
That's what I'm thinking.
Technically edible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we're going to dive into 2 of Tobe Hooper's movies, and they're, I feel like outside of Texas Chain Saw Massacre and Poltergeist, he kind of flies under the radar because most people know those 2 movies and then maybe a few others. So why don't we just start out with both of you saying what movie you picked and why you picked it?
I chose Lifeforce. Lifeforce has for years been my answer to the question when people ask me what my favorite film is, just broadly, which I don't know that it is actually my favorite film, but it is my favorite sort of coalition of elements of a film. It has Tobe Hooper, it has Golan Globus era canon, it has Dan O'Bannon, it's got a million things that we'll talk about that are sort of elements of the film. And it's just sort of like it's sort of a nonstop banger, I think. So that's why I picked it. It's also, I think, its biggest, sorry, I'm stepping on you, Bennett, but I think it's his biggest budget film. So in terms of like examining the range of Hooper, it feels like one of the extremes, kind of no matter what the other extreme you're examining is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. Well, Bennett, what's your extreme? What's the other direction we're going?
And I picked Spontaneous Combustion, which is a movie he made kind of after bottoming out with the trio of Golan and Globus films. This is another decent budget for him. Apparently, it's around like $5.5 million, and it earned a great cume of about 50,000 apparently. But I picked this film because it much like Jim, you said that Lifeforce is maybe not your favorite film, but your favorite coalition of elements. I think what makes Tobe Hooper's films so great is that whether or not they cohere as effective stories or are at all coherent in any way, they're oftentimes such wonderful coalitions of elements, and Spontaneous Combustion is definitely that. It's got goop, it's got explosions, and it's got a fantastic lead performance from Brad Dourif, who I think is definitely the best horror actor ever and might be one of the greatest American actors, honestly.
Definitely high in the rankings, right? He's got to be,
Top 10,
I don't know,
yeah.
top, I was going to say 6.
He's most famous probably for doing a Jack Nicholson impression in Child's Play, and I would definitely rank him higher than Jack Nicholson on the list of actors.
On the
I
Jack
rank
Nicholsons?
Jack Nicholson highly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a fan.
Of the Jack Nicholsons, he's probably my
Oh no,
favorite.
I mean I'd rank him higher than Jack Nicholson on actors. Period.
Sure.
Which I guess means he's a better Jack Nicholson than Jack Nicholson.
I would rank Christian Slater lower than Jack Nicholson on the list of Jack Nicholsons.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, Steven Dourif as well.
Do you remember first time you saw one of Tobe Hooper's films?
I think I can probably place the year. It would have been '07. I was into the Saw movies at that point. I think I'd recently watched Saw 2 at a sleepover, and I Saw 3 was playing in theaters. And this was kind of in the Wild West days of YouTube, when it was, not that it's that hard to post like full movies now, but back then like really high profile stuff could be up there for a long time. Like I remember I first watched The Departed on YouTube, and it was up there for months. But I remember watching Texas Chain Saw Massacre on YouTube. I remember trying to talk to people about Texas Chain Saw Massacre and them being like off put that I'd watched it. And you know what? I saw the remake beforehand. So I was aware of Tobe Hooper by like osmosis, but my first encounter would have been '07. I probably had seen the remake several times before that. I probably first saw that in '04. But cliched as it is, I first encountered him through his breakout film.
I have, mine is sort of two-pronged. I didn't watch horror growing up. I was an easily spooked young child, into young man. But I did, I listened to pretty gnarly music, and there was a show I used to listen to on my local college radio station called Return to the Pit. And I think the first time, my first actual encounter with any Tobe Hooper was, there was a song by this band called Mortician that's like a, like grindcore band with a drum machine, I think, that sampled the opening of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I had never seen it. I didn't know anything about it. And they sort of play the I think it's John Larroquette, right? Intro, where he's sort of portraying it as a real thing that happened and giving you the gist of it. And I thought it was real. I thought it was just a real story that they had pulled a clip from and stuck on this song. So that was the first thing, was I heard that, and I was genuinely terrified about it for about 2 nights. But I think the first time I saw one of his films was then. I remember learning when I must have been 17, and I learned that the kind of stress that you get when you watch horror movies or like ride on roller coasters is good for your immune system. And I was sick one time, and I was like, I'm going to start diving into horror movies. I had never really done it. And I watched The Exorcist and Poltergeist.
Wow.
That's amazing.
It was as an attempt to get well from being sick. And I was like, oh, these movies are great.
I'm cute.
What am I missing out on? Yeah, I was so enthusiastically cured that I never got sick again.
Jim, you're a filmmaker in Austin. How is Tobe Hooper kind of received these days in Austin and just as a filmmaker as a whole down there?
When they did the Eggshells restoration, people were like, he's one of us. But that's really, for the most part, nobody really. The only dude that you really hear about in Austin is Richard Linklater. Everyone's really excited about him. But even there's also, I mean, Robert Rodriguez makes all his movies here too, but nobody's like, ooh, he's one of us. It's really just Linklater and then really small, like the Zellner brothers. It's like really small time dudes. The only person that they claim, really, the town claims, is Ricky Lynx. That's what he likes to be called.
So, Jim, you mentioned that Lifeforce was Tobe Hooper's biggest budget movie, and it had a $25 million budget. How did we get here with Tobe Hooper?
Well, right, because it's interesting, right? Because he starts off as a documentary guy doing like sort of small-timey documentaries, and then he has a TV movie that's Peter, Paul, and Mary. That's, it's very political, in the way that Peter, Paul, and Mary are very political. And then he starts making his own weirdo little movies, right? He makes Eggshells, which only sort of became available to watch 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and it's super weird. And then goes into Texas Chainsaw, which is the most famous, right? And the next couple of movies after that are working very low budget, very sort of documentary style. He sort of like keeps that rawness, which I think is a big part of what people like about Texas Chainsaw, right? Is that they react to it feels grimy and real in a way because he's coming from this super low budget, super scrappy, very documentary style background. And then he catches the eye of Steven Spielberg, who gives him Poltergeist, right? Which is what, like $10 million.
Yeah.
Which is, and it's his first. It's, I think, one of the things that's delightful about Lifeforce is it's sort of, when we talk about sort of the structure of a film, right? We look at thesis and antithesis, synthesis, right? And this is sort of that. It's like he has this thesis that is like all the movies previous to Poltergeist that are this like super gritty, very, very down to earth style. And then Poltergeist is clearly, it's like he's entering the Steven Spielberg universe. You know, he's like, suddenly he's getting access to super high budget effects and rotating rooms and millions of dollars. And then Lifeforce is him being unleashed by Golan Globus to sort of take that huge budget and take this new world of like super fancy effects and stuff, but just make a Tobe Hooper movie. The answer to your question, right, is that he sort of got jumped up to Poltergeist, and then Golan Globus were kind of nuts, right? That their whole legacy is just throwing huge amounts of money in directions that people wouldn't have necessarily expected, or that weren't necessarily the best places to throw money if you want to make money, right? So they were like, oh, we're going to take this Poltergeist guy, and we got the right to this space vampire book, and we're going to make it into a giant space movie, and it's going to be, you know, space movies are big right now, and it's going to be a big moneymaker. And then it seems like generally let their directors have pretty free reign. So it's, you know, he is working with people he wants to work with and is sort of making the movie he wants to make, but has their scale of budget. There's also, I think I read somewhere that they kept sort of running out and being like, we want more. So I imagine the budget was originally, you know, closer to 20 or something. But they had to sort of keep pushing it to finish the movie.
I think he went 5 weeks over schedule. So I imagine they did keep having to, you know, keep it going, but
I think even when he's in a world like the sort of Spielberg world of big budget effects, though, I think you can see that he's so his own guy, which is why I find it so galling that like everybody, when they talk about Poltergeist, it's always that like, oh, Steven Spielberg actually directed it, because like, I don't know, even if that is true, there's such a grimness, there's such a like I don't know, like stuff like the picking his face apart in the mirror, or like the actual like bones apparently that they use at the end, even the clown scene, which I remember putting that movie off for so long because it was so, just the very idea was so horrifying to me. I don't know, like Hooper from the very beginning has such a distinct, I described it in the notes for the film as like a pungency to his films. I think it says a lot that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, his breakthrough, is like the 5th sweatiest movie in his oeuvre. Both of the movies we're talking about today are exceedingly
way sweaty,
balmy, very, very sweaty, and both probably sweatier than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Spontaneous Combustion is probably smellier.
It's the sweatiest. It's probably the sweatiest of that. There are 1 or 2 I haven't seen, but it's definitely up there, and it's got to be top 3 sweatiest. I didn't mean to say that when he's doing Poltergeist, he's doing like a Steven Spielberg thing, right? I just mean he's like being introduced to those techniques and that sort of alternate filmmaking style. But there's none of these movies, and I think you sort of said this in the intro, that the thing that is sort of definitionally great about Tobe Hooper is that he's like creating beautiful moments and incredible elements, and he has such a like offbeat sense of pacing, and he's constantly interested in like keeping you on your feet and sort of keeping you a little confused. And his like love of like colors and like rhythm is there in all of his movies, and he pushes everything to a gnarly degree. I didn't know about the thing where people say Spielberg directed Poltergeist until like a month or 2 ago. Jason told me that, and I was like, that's crazy. And then I rewatched Poltergeist, and I was like, how would anyone? It has nothing in common with it. I mean, it has like a slickness sort of that Spielberg has, but it doesn't. It's so insane. You would have to believe that Spielberg was like completely out of his mind making that movie. But it's so in keeping with a Tobe Hooper film. It's every choice that's being made, you're like, this is a very Tobe Hooper choice. And I don't understand how anyone could have gotten to the point where they would think that. It's so crazy.
Right, and then whether he's working in like TV movies or on tiny budgets, direct to DVD, I don't know, there's such a distinct quality. I don't know, I feel like it's really only on like film Twitter and Letterboxd that anybody bothers talking about him as like an auteur. I can think of like 5 people who really like go to bat for him. Like seriously and talk about all of the films. But I don't know, like they can't be all this consistently good and the director be no good.
I do think from sort of watching a span getting ready for this, I hadn't watched anything sort of post, I don't know, 90s, I think. And so I watched like Toolbox Murders and Mortuary, which are obviously, they're being made at a different time and in a different way, right? He was desirable at one point, and then he was undesirable, and then he was like sort of just an older guy that like people were like, maybe Tobe Hooper's name will get us some money, right? They're like very low budget sort of mid 2000s movies, and when I was watching them, I was like, I think one of the things that sort of ties all these films together is that I don't think Tobe Hooper is a writer, right? He has writing credits on a couple of his early films, but he's like working with Kim Henkel early on, and then like, Lifeforce is Dan O'Bannon, and then like, most of the movies are like, the script feels very of whoever wrote it. And then things like Mortuary and Toolbox Murders, if you look at just those on like a the things that are being said level, you're like, there's some juice to this, right? Both of those movies, there's like something going on that makes them better than just a script of like any mid 2000s horror movie. But neither of them, they both could use another pass. I was like, I could do a rewrite on either of these films and make them funnier and scarier and better. And I'm a middling writer. But I don't think Tobe Hooper, I think he's like, this is the script I'm working with, and I'm 100% committing to this script, and then I'm going to add my Hooper on top of it. I'm going to hoop out on top of this script. And he just like throws everything he has at the document that he has. And I think which is, a style that I think people don't respect as much when they're talking about auteurism. They're like, oh no, this person has to have their fingers in every single pot, right? But I get the feeling that he is just directing the shit out of the document that he has.
I think those are both perfect examples of him putting like Hooperisms on not so great material and directing the shit out of stuff. But those are both, I don't know, like tertiary movies in his career, and I think they're full of. I would rank them in the top 10 probably, but
sure.
They have more indelible images than I could think of in literally any Wes Craven, Romero, Carpenter film, and I love all three and many films from all three. But there's nothing in any of their filmography that like turns my stomach, like when you're looking down the drain in Mortuary and those like fuzzy like tendrils are coming out. Oh.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Or that black soup she's feeding them. Like, only Tobe Hooper could come up with stuff like that.
Yeah. It's like truly gut-wrenching.
One of the things I love about Tobe Hooper is in interviews, his answers are so simple and basic, but he conveys everything perfectly. Like, in Eaten Alive, my brother and I watched a few weeks ago, and we watched the director's intro expecting it to be like a few minutes long, but he literally just says like, "Hi, I'm Tobe Hooper. I directed this film. I hope you enjoy the colors." And then the movie starts, and we were just like, that is the greatest intro ever. But, taking all of his early films into effect, once he gets to Lifeforce, like, I was blown away by the first scenes because, like, it's just purple and big and huge. And how do you feel the colors in this scene, A, allowed him to do, a grander thing with a big budget, but also, like, harken back to his past?
Tobe Hooper is sort of on record as saying that he came at this as a 70 millimeter Hammer movie, right? Which is, it's the appropriate response when Golan and Globus come to you and they're like, we want you to make a movie based on this book called Space Vampires, right? You're like, this is sort of the current thing that is closest to Hammer, and they're asking me to make space pulp, and they're giving me $25 million. So that's, it makes sense that that's how he approached it. And so I think, the like colorful, his space is like deep purples and burgundies and like whirls of like blue. And then the spaceships are like giant biological umbrella claws, right? It's very sort of comic booky. It's very sort of pulpy, but shot in a very grand sort of 2001 way, right? Everything's like beautiful and spinning around slowly, and this glass
floats really elegantly.
Yeah, it has a slickness to it, right? That that things that are that pulpy don't usually have. It's a really a wonderful marriage, I think.
There's a big Henry Mancini score too, as they're like approaching. It really is such a perfect mix of like prestige and camp. I don't know. There's few films I can think of that marry them so well without seeming contrived.
I saw that they were like they gave Mancini a 10-minute chunk from the beginning that's just them sort of getting to space, and they were like, this is what the movie's going to be like, so score the movie. and he was like, oh great, right? He must have been like, this is going to be my 2001, and then they must have given him the rest to score, and he was like, what am I doing here?
Oh, what have I done?
Yeah, exactly. Because it starts off as this like beautiful, elegant space ballet. I vividly remember the first time I watched this movie because it starts off with this like level of spectacle that at that point I had seen a few Tobe Hooper movies, but none of them feel like that. It feels huge, right? It feels like it has a huge budget, which is, for 25 million in the mid 80s, is like a big budget, but it's nothing sort of compared to what we currently throw at big movies, right? But it feels a lot bigger than a lot of movies that have a lot more money, which I think is, to Tobe Hooper's credit. But it feels giant, and you sort of end up in this beautiful, like floating space thing, and then you go inside this giant alive spaceship, and it's full of these giant dead bats. And just the way his characters exist in the space, they're all sort of nonplussed, but like a little freaked out. But they're like, I don't know, they're like, there's creatures in here, but they're not like, they're mammal. I don't know. There's a lot going on, and sort of the way it all flows is really lovely.
I love the like Star Trek ass like voiceover we get about their mission too.
Oh yeah,
it's
John
right
Larroquette comes in and it's like, who also I think does the intro in Texas Chainsaw, doesn't he? Larroquette?
Oh,
Am I wrong
so.
about that? Yeah,
yeah.
Which, what a fun pairing. He like tells us some facts about this mission, that like the ship is the first ship that's been able to accelerate constantly as it goes into space to simulate gravity, which is great. They would be going so fast.
It also makes it so that adds like it becomes so disorienting once they get off the ship and we're unmoored from gravity too. The whirling camera is used to such great effect in this. The first time when he's like hypnotized by Matilda May's character, and that motif comes back, it takes us back in time. It comes back repeatedly, and then like even when the camera's not doing it, you sort of start to feel like the camera's doing it. It's like once we've left that like Earth-like gravity, we don't get back.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice because they use it as, you just said this, right? But it's literalized, right? They're like, we're whirling around in space now because there isn't gravity, but it's also being used in ways where you would like rotate a camera to like represent something weird happening, right? It's like he's super disoriented and falling in love with this strange space woman in a coffin, but also we're like, no, we're just floating around in space. And everyone else comes in at weird angles,
and it would be like too heavy-handed or too obvious if it wasn't so good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what's so cool is that in that scene, like, we're not sure if he's really spinning or if it's just in his head. And then they're both oriented differently in the frame than when they first got in. It's so, it puts you like in zero gravity. You don't know where you are.
One of the things we sort of have touched on a couple times, and I'm sure we'll keep talking about, is that this like special Tobe Hooper juice is in a lot of ways, it's like he like leans into sort of grotesqueries. He leans into these like big motions, but a lot of them play off in really elegant ways, and this is a specific example, right? But I think there are a lot of them across all of his films where he's doing something that's like a very large, bold motion, but he's doing it in a way that sort of, it just glides gently into the movie and just makes you feel a way, even though it's sort of like having a guy show up in screen sort of at a funny angle and then pulling out and showing other people poking into the frame at other angles is a funny joke, right? But the way he does it is very slick, and it feels like a natural motion that is good storytelling in addition to being sort of a dumb joke, which I think is, I don't know, I think a lot of people have a trouble marrying those two vibes, you know?
Yeah, he can marry goofiness and elegance, and also like I think that just the most famous example of how he can mix grotesquerie or like madness and elegance would be just like the ending of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, the ballet with the chainsaw. He can make both really, really, like goofy and kind of like offbeat stuff really, really elegant and beautiful and engaging, and he can make just horrifying stuff really sort of elegant and unusual. Like there's kind of there's a weird beauty to like the Leatherface mask, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
With or without makeup on it.
Yeah.
So before we get too far into this, can we just get like the 1 minute what's going on in this movie? Just if people haven't seen it, so it's not like, wait, space?
Sure.
Girl, what?
It's hard to boil down because one of the big joys of this film is that it's constantly sort of shifting under your feet, right? It starts off as space movie. We have astronauts finding a spaceship tailing Halley's Comet, and it's got creatures in it. And then we're on Earth, and those astronauts their ship crashes, and there's nobody in it except for these alien beings. And then the alien beings are the formerly titular space vampires, right? It's based on a book called Space Vampires. And they were going to call... I read somewhere Tobe Hooper was like, I wanted to call it Space Vampires because it felt more Hammer, but Space Vampires is a terrible title. Even just subjectively, it's a bad name for a book or a movie.
I wish they hadn't spoiled that it was called Space Vampires in the opening credits because, like you said, this movie becomes 100 different movies in one. You think it's going to be kind of a riff on Alien because they find this like floating ship that you're like, oh, don't investigate that. They go in and there's weird stuff. There's floating bats. There's these 3 naked people in these like glass coffins. They get hypnotized by this. She's only credited as Space Girl, Matilda May's character, and then basically like. Everybody dies, but they get the vampires, they bring them back, and it immediately becomes, again, 100 different movies in one. It becomes like a possession movie. It becomes like a werewolf movie. It becomes a zombie movie closer to the end. There's exorcisms.
Like a large-scale disaster film.
Oh, it's crazy. I love to... I didn't think they were going to show you... like London on Fire when he mentions that on the radio. I thought it was going to be like a bit that they were like, that you hear him talking about it, but you don't see it. And then you see it and it's great because it looks both so like massive and so low budget at the same time. It's like such a throwback, like a miniature on fire like that. But basically once they get back to Earth, Matilda May starts to like hypnotize and possess everybody. It's also it must have been an inspiration for Under the Skin. I know the movie is technically based on a book, and I wonder if even the book must have inspired this because she starts to sort of go around like the English countryside, like seducing and possessing people.
Like old men.
It's kind of like the same premise, right?
Well, so there's 3 alive space vampires, right? And 2 of them are men and one of them's a woman, and the men die immediately. They're all like beautiful and nude, and the 2 men are killed off immediately when they arrive on Earth, more or less. So then it's just this beautiful nude woman who walks around, and everyone who sees her falls in love with her, and then she steals some of their life force, right? And that's the like plot. And then it's about the one guy who survived the space trip. Partnering up with a guy from the British military and trying to chase her down and kill her. But at the same time, everyone that she's taking life force from is becoming another monster, and they're all stealing other people's life force, and then all of London is descending into chaos. I think that's the plot.
You got it.
Yeah.
But basically the one guy who survived the vampire attack is also... He's conflicted in his mission because he knows he has to kill her, but he's also like in love with her. One of the things the movie is so obviously like suffused with like sex, and it's about sexual obsession, and one of the primary characters is naked the whole time. But I thought it was really interesting how indirectly sex itself seems to be discussed.
Yeah,
and how much they articulate how they feel about the Matilda May character in terms of like love and longing rather than lust. Like I think be with me.
They're like I wanted her. I wanted to be with her. It's all very like PG. The way they talk about it. It's weirdly
chaste for a movie with so much full frontal nudity.
Even though, she's nude for the first 25 minutes, and then they're like, oh, she's gotten away and she killed a woman and now she has clothes. That's a line. They're like, now she has clothes. And then the next time we see her, she's in another woman's body who is clothed. And then the next time we see her after that, she's in the sheerest bathrobe, which she takes off immediately, and then she's nude again for the rest of the film. They give her one scene to wear like a light curtain.
And there's no full frontal from the 2 men. It's very much
they put a metal bar.
Always like conveniently obscured by shadow. It's in keeping with Hollywood's historic cowardice regarding the nude male form. Right? Craig, you mentioned it's been a while since I've seen Night Terrors, but you're right. Night Terrors does feel gratuitous. Does feature gratuitous nudity of every sort.
Yeah, and it comes out of nowhere too.
I don't know why they didn't. I don't know why they didn't just go full pedal to the metal here.
Yeah, because you're already hard
has
R.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost more distracting that they don't, because it's like, oh, it is going to line up. It did. Haha.
Yeah. It's like those Austin Powers scenes, right? Where he's like carrying a gourd in front of his penis.
I honestly, I feel like if you're going to have any sort of suggestion of nudity, you've got to go balls to the wall. No pun intended.
Balls to the screen. Yeah.
Because since Austin Powers, everything looks like that. Everything just calls to mind that. That ruined suggestive nudity, I think, forever in cinema, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be nude or don't.
Also, another thing I think this film was missing that it probably could have had, considering it has everything else, is the astronaut who survives. I can't remember what's his name, like Collingwood or Carlisle.
Colonel something. I don't know. Everyone is Colonel something, and they're all similar. It's like Colonel Cunningham, Colonel Crabtree.
I've realized in trying to watch these how little I watch movies for plot. I think it's another reason I like Tobe Hooper more than these other directors, is because like his stories tend to cohere the least, and they're just the most fun for the imageries and the wild elements. But the surviving astronaut crash lands in Texas, and then there's a smash cut to them like driving to his pod. No needle drop, no classic rock song playing. They
no like 13th floor elevators or something.
It would have been so great.
It is nice. It's like a nice fun. I don't know. For me, the first time I watched it again, it was like a nice fun. They're like, it landed. Where did it land? Big dramatic pause. Texas, right? And you're like, yay! I don't know if you guys are familiar with like with wrestling chants, but I was like, Tobe Hooper. You know, it's like you get excited about it. It feels like a big.
Or just a big Texas title card or something. We were missing something there. It's definitely a fist pump line. You know, you've heard of laugh lines. This is a fist pump line for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's where you throw your cup of soda at the screen, but like in joy, right? Not in anger. You're so excited about it. I do want to loop back to your point about the sex thing for a second, just for 1 second, because there is. I agree with you for all of the movie, but there's one scene that I find disconcerting where the main guy he's like a little bit he's absorbed a little bit of the space vampire's powers, so he's a little psychic for the whole movie. And there's one scene where they interrogate a woman, and he partway through the scene is like, this woman is a masochist, she wants me to beat this information out of her, you can leave if you want. And the other colonel is like, no, I'm a voyeur, and sits and watches as he presumably beats her up for information, but in what seems like a sort of sexual way. That one scene always stands out to me as it's like remarkably unchaste, but also feels, I don't know, politically dubious.
Yeah, no, that it stuck out, and I've seen a lot of people like note it on their Letterboxd reviews. Is like, what is Hooper like saying here about these guys? Yeah, no, that is one moment that sticks out. I guess they talk about it in indirect ways, but they do seem to be like constantly referring to sex. There's that line like you'd probably rather be recuperating with a pretty nurse or something like that.
Yeah.
It's they're always finding ways to like dance around it. And I don't know, like,
but it's like how I don't know. It's how like people joke. It's like very jokey. It's jocular the way they talk about it. It's like it's not sexy.
Yeah, it's either that or it's this like indirect like can't bear to talk about it. Because the one that sticks out for me is when he has the dream and he says something like, God, like she approached me or she possessed me or something like that. And they go like, how? And he obviously means like, did you fuck? And he goes, in my mind. I'm like, I don't think that's what he meant.
Yeah, you're like, no, they want details.
And even the fact that the Lifeforce draining procedure, if we want to call it that, is
like a Frenching,
leaking out. Yeah. It is kind of chaste for like what we're meant to understand is going on.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also, it feels, I mean, it's like the vampire thing, right? It's like vampires are very sexual monsters. Like their whole thing is about sex. Although actually, now that I'm like going down that path, other vampire movies are also sort of similarly chaste, right? There's a lot of like suggestive talking and then like neck biting and then like somebody behind a willowy veil. Maybe that's what they're riffing on is this sort of idea that vampires in films at least are historically, I've never read a book, but in films at least, they're historically very like, everything's very like, ooh, I'm so attracted to him and he's like so beautiful, and then he just like bites your neck a little bit, you know? Right.
They have to be in keeping with sort of a Victorian attitude toward sex in general. Yeah.
Which is that it's not real.
That it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I like too that like the movie starts out as maybe an Alien ripoff and then ends up like talking about ancient aliens, which I've never
Oh,
seen
yeah.
Prometheus, but from my understanding, Prometheus is about like ancient aliens. It's wild that this movie both rips off Alien and then predicts Prometheus. It makes you wonder
it's
if Ridley
true.
Scott was trying to get one to get back at the late Tobe Hooper with.
We should
Prometheus.
watch Aliens 1 through 6 and see if they're all touched on in this film somehow. I've heard people comparing this to the third what's that dude Quartermass movie, the Quartermass in the Pit, which I don't know if you guys are I don't know how hip y'all are to the Quartermass films.
I've heard them referred to is as familiar as I am.
I think are the Hammer films that he would be most specifically referring to when he says that he's sort of making a Hammer movie, right? Is that the Quartermass things were, I think they were all BBC serials that then Hammer bought the rights to and remade into features. But I know that I've seen Quartermass in the Pit because one time I found a VHS tape of it in a post office, and I was like, "What's this going to be?" And I took it home and watched it, and I was like, "This is crazy." And that movie is about that idea. It's about them like. Quartermass, the like character, is like a guy who he's like pre-Doctor Who, like an Earth guy who deals with space. And the third Quartermass in the Pit is about him. They're like doing a dig and they find these things, and it turns out that aliens have been visiting Earth and like influencing how we evolved. And then the end of it is similar. It like there's a giant like energy beam shooting up, and London is on fire, and he has to like drive a crane into the energy beam to like ground it and kill the aliens or whatever. But also Quartermass 2, the second one, is all about he's like sent an exploration to space. And then the ship comes back empty, and then these aliens start taking over. They like have pods with gas in them, and people who breathe the gas get possessed by the aliens, and the aliens start taking over like the government officials and stuff, which also happens in this film. So it does feel like he's riffing on multiple of the like old Quartermass movies, which is interesting. And I'm curious how much of that is in. I mean, I haven't, and I'm not going to read the book, Space Vampires. But I'm curious how I would really be interested in seeing how much this diverges from the book, or hearing about it from someone who's going to bother reading the book. Because I think this is another movie where the author was like, I hate it.
Well, I did see Tobe Hooper did mention those films specifically as inspiration. So
did I?
You're onto something there. One thing I do love about this movie, though, is there's like the senior doctor who's the one studying like when death actually happens.
Yeah.
And at one point, he just like pulls out the vampire book, and then later he's like, "Hey, I figured it out."
I love how much of the action we're meant to understand happens off screen, which is kind of why I thought we wouldn't see London on fire. Correct me if I'm wrong. He stabs the vampire with that big sword completely off screen, right? He just ends up explaining that later on and giving you a ton of exposition. I love that.
We cut to a room where the vampire is on like a thing impaled through. And he's like, "Hey, I did a thing. Yeah, I stabbed
you
this
see
guy."
The other guy.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to stab them through an energy center an inch below their heart, because it's not normal vampires. It's space vampires.
So one quote I do want to put in front of you guys, and critics apparently did not like or seem to understand this movie, but one that I thought was hilarious was the New York Times called it hysterical vampire porn.
Sure, that's true.
You like that? Okay.
They say that like it's a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, is that a bad? I do feel like I saw some excerpts from reviews that were meant to be bad reviews, and every single one of them I was like, this is accurate and sounds fun.
Yeah.
Right. You're perfectly describing why I like this movie. Don't threaten me with a good time.
Yeah, exactly. That's it is all those things. Everyone is hysterical. Matilda May is completely nude for the whole film. And it's they're sort of vampire. Vampire is the least accurate of those words, I think.
I think, as with like every Tobe Hooper film, most Tobe Hooper films, by the title or the end of the opening credits, you sort of know whether you're bought in or not. This one maybe goes a little longer than most because it has like the seriousness up until they get back down to earth. This one gives you about like 15 minutes before I think the Hooper skeptics will have like checked out. And maybe that's why people found it particularly.
That's why they're so mad,
because it had some of a sheen of like seriousness, or at least the sort of like mock seriousness that they were used to.
Yeah. Although it's funny, this sort of goes back to what I was saying about his like grand grotesque motions having like a beauty to them. There's a bunch of stuff in that opening sequence where it's like there are a bunch of giant dead bat creatures in that room, and that's super goofy. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's in that opening sequence that on second or third watch, you're like, oh, this is absolutely ridiculous. But it does, when you're first watching it, you're like, oh, this is like a big deal, serious space film, until it stops doing that, and then it's doing another thing, right? It does, it goes through 5 movies over the course of the thing, which is lovely.
It also, for a movie that's as long as it is, nearly 2 hours, which is usually like the dead zone for me, an hour and 50 minutes, the worst runtime a movie can be. It really moves, and you're on to movie 2 of this movie within like 15 minutes.
Well, I think it's almost like watching. I agree with you. I think every movie should be either 80 minutes or shorter, or at least 3 hours. That middle, who cares? Get it off my screen. But this almost feels like you're binging 5 episodes of a really slick TV show that just flows into each other, right? It's
like American Horror. It's like if they cut out all the chaff from American Horror Story, because every season of American Horror Story is this movie, basically.
It could be an hour and 50 minutes.
Movies like sewn together, and yes, ultimately you could take all of the good stuff and make it like a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, and like let stuff happen off screen. We don't have to see everything happen. Tobe Hooper knows how it's done.
God, the best to ever do it. At least horror-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I mentioned at the beginning, one of the reasons I picked this is because it's a confluence, right? And one of the things that I assume he had this choice, but I don't know. One of the things that I think is great about this is choosing Dan O'Bannon to be the writer on it, right? I think there's a couple of writing credits, but I only give Dan O'Bannon credit in my head because I respect him. But it's like you're being offered the chance to adapt this book that seems like it's probably a middling book, no offense to the guy who wrote it, the space vampire book, and you're being given a huge budget, and you're working with Golan Globus, who you know is going to be like yes to whatever you say. So like you bring on Dan O'Bannon, who like has a history of writing not only space movies and not only like science fiction, but also goofy things and weird horror. I think their chakras are aligned, Dan O'Bannon and Tobe Hooper, and I wish they'd work together more. I think they just did this in Invaders from Mars, right?
I think that's it. Yeah.
And Invaders from Mars is basically a shot-for-shot remake of the old Invaders from Mars, right? It's like there's very little that they did. I mean, I think they did a lot of stuff, but it doesn't stray a lot, right? This is sort of the only movie where they like get together and really while out. But I think that they are tonally similar human beings, and I think that is a remarkably good choice for as I said, I don't think Tobe Hooper is bothering to change the words when he's on set, right? I think he's taking what he has and going with it, and I think Dan O'Bannon is a good partner for that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, if he'd had more collaborators like Dan O'Bannon and like stronger relationships with them and like sustain them over multiple films, if I don't know, if he'd be remembered more fondly. Because it seems like he was largely a free agent. I mean, we talked a little bit about the bouncing from different like styles of filmmaking and different sort of budget levels and stuff. Had he had somebody like Dan O'Bannon to sort of work on the scripts for him, would the films be better, and would he have gotten more kind of high profile opportunities? It's hard to imagine the films being better. But
yeah. But I think the part that other people care about that we have both, I think, now stated we're not super invested in would be more cohesive, perhaps. The story, maybe. Although Dan O'Bannon also not super invested in story, obviously, right? He's more invested in bits, I think.
So, Jim, you've mentioned that you've called this on more than one occasion your favorite film.
Yes.
Winding this portion down, what makes this your favorite film? Because I think a lot of people would hear that and be like, "Who the hell is this guy?" But I understand it.
It's just so full of good juice, you know? It's like it's like eating a ripe grapefruit. Just everything is constantly coming at you. And it is, I think to some degree it is that when people ask me what my favorite movie is, I want it to be a Tobe Hooper movie, and I want it to be a Dan O'Bannon. You know what I mean? But like, I can't say it's Texas Chain Saw Massacre 2 because that doesn't have all the other elements I want. And I want it to be Dan O'Bannon, but I can't say it's Dead and Buried because that doesn't have all the other elements I want. And I want it to be a Golan Globus movie, but I'm not going to say it's, the Masters of the Universe film because that doesn't have all the other. It has a bunch, but it doesn't have all the other elements that I want. You know what I mean? And this, when I'm trying to sort of succinctly define the things that are exciting to me about film, this movie is I don't think at any given moment I think I could probably name a movie that I would rather watch, right? But I would never not be excited to watch this film, and I think that at any time I could show this film to anyone and be like, this is what I like about movies. This is what brings me joy, is this. And it's sort of a thesis statement for what is good about cinema, I think, this film.
Oh, wow. Perfectly said. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of wraps it up. We're going to take a quick break, then we're going to hop into Spontaneous Combustion. We'll be back in just a minute.
Yes, but this is no ordinary.
Could you take down a message and give it to him before he sees it?
Look, I'm not responsible for chasing down people for personal calls.
Listen, you idiot! I don't think this is as important as your lousy snap.
I reach him now.
So one of the reasons I was so excited to have you two on specifically for this episode is because, Bennett, you wrote about Texas Chain Saw 2 a while back, and Jim for Synesthesia's just absolutely insane series, Hell to the King, which we're not going to bring back this year, sorry. You guys visited The Mangler, and
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you guys have already covered both those already, but one thing that interests me about Tobe Hooper is after Lifeforce, he kind of had a downhill slide in the public eye, at least. I just want to hear a little bit about your thoughts on both of those films and how they kind of represent Hooper as a whole.
Well, I think Texas Chain Saw Massacre 2, and I wrote about this a little bit in my piece on it, I think it makes me like Hooper more than I already did. The fact that he was like given the opportunity, given one of the biggest budgets he'd ever have, an opportunity to revisit the franchise that had made his name, and he just burns it all to the fucking ground, like literally. It's such a refreshing entry in a franchise when now fans run everything, and franchise filmmaking is, such as it is.
It's so Lifeforce that we just talked about was the first of his. He got like a 3-picture contract with Golan Globus, right? And then I think it's that, and then Invaders from Mars, and then Chainsaw 2. And I don't know if that was a stipulation where they were like, we want 3 movies and one of them has to be the sequel to your most famous, or if he just decided he was gonna do Chainsaw 2 and do what he did. But either way, it's a really beautiful motion. I think in your essay, it's called Salting the Earth, right? Your essay,
Salting the franchise fields.
Yeah, which is exactly what he's like. He's like, this is not only the second and what I would like to be the last movie in this franchise, it's also taking everything that's interesting and good about the first one and really just blowing it up to an insane degree. It's both the most fun and the goriest, right?
It says it all that the film opens with a guy shooting a sign for the Alamo. It says like the Alamo 5 miles. So that's how this movie feels about reverence for anything, for any sort of like an institution. My sense is that it was sort of an assignment. It was like, you're getting these budgets and you get to make these movies, but we have to have Texas Chainsaw 2. And I don't know what a perfect way to respond to that assignment. You're given an assignment like that. You could make a Jason Reitman's Ghostbusters, or you can make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I can either just kind of be like, nah, fine, I'll do the thing, or you can be like, I'm gonna really put all my meat into this assignment and like really, really blow it up, really have some fun with it.
So Jim, what about The Mangler?
There's not a lot I don't know if people who listen to these things or pay a lot of attention to Split Tooth know that we all live in a compound together.
Oh yes.
And that we all come and work in the same office buildings, and that I halfway through October 2 years ago made myself a homemade The Mangler t-shirt, and I wore it every day for the rest of October, and everyone was like, Jim, you smell terrible. Please. It's all I would talk about anytime we were like eating lunch together in the Split Tooth cafeteria. I would just talk about The Mangler. Everyone would be like, please get off The Mangler, but I just couldn't. I was stuck on it for 2.5 weeks. So I feel like there isn't a ton that I can say about it that I didn't say on probably 5 episodes of our Hell to the King thing. But it is also just an absolutely joyous film that's full of just it's also, so I watched it in the middle of watching 30 I don't know, 5 Stephen King films. And so I saw a lot of people taking Stephen King and bending it to the screen, right? And most of them, there are a few exceptions. Most of them were very sort of sedate approaches to taking a book and making it into a film. But The Mangler it's like taking it and really just throwing everything at the screen, right? We have Robert Englund in like insane makeup, and Buffalo Bill as like the most bedraggled detective. All the performances are phenomenal. It's also an incredibly sweaty movie, even though it doesn't have to be, but it is. It's, I don't know, it just does a lot of things right. One of the other ones, actually, Bennett, that sort of leads into Spontaneous Combustion is one of the other ones that really came out of nowhere for me and surprised me was Night Shift, which also stars Brad Dourif, who like just rampages across the whole film.
Yeah, I think he's had so many great, like, Hooper's leading men are so unusual and they're great.
Yeah.
I love Ted Levine so much.
Yeah.
There's no one in the history of Hollywood who sounds like Ted Levine.
No.
And Hooper uses that to great effect. The only person in Hollywood history who maybe kind of sounds like Ted Levine is Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black. Sort of sounds a little like Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill. But that brings me, I guess, to Brad Dourif, who is just incredible in Spontaneous Combustion. It combines every element of what like you like in a Brad Dourif performance. He's like kind of like wounded and sad. He's kind of an asshole. He's kind of creepy. This performance should have been nominated for an Oscar, frankly. Yeah. Brad Dourif in Spontaneous Combustion.
He's one of those actors who, no matter what you're asking him to do, he swings for the fences. You know,
and he's perfect for Craig. You, I think, pointed this out. He's perfect for a Hooper movie. Because he can clue into the goofiness. He can clue into when it's supposed to be like serious. He can clue into when it's supposed to be sad.
Yeah. Not a lot of actors can hit all those beats. Yeah.
Right. Bennett, you want to just give us a little mini teaser about what is going on here? Because just like Lifeforce, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and honestly, Lifeforce is a movie that like where a lot of stuff like happens off screen. Apparently, Spontaneous Combustion is a movie that was really chopped to bits like the editing room. So there's a lot of stuff apparently that we're not seeing. I think it works in its favor because it's a movie that feels like an ever-widening conspiracy and like an ever-tightening noose on Brad Dourif's character. But basically, in 1955, a couple agrees to take part in this experiment as part of Operation Samson, where basically they take a bunch of anti-radioactivity vaccines and agree to go into a bunker for a week where a hydrogen bomb is basically going to be detonated above them. And then they spend a week in this underground bunker. And I guess they're trying to see if they can create people who are immune to the potential effects of a nuclear holocaust. And I really like that that's like the defeatist attitude that America has going into like this new age. It's like, well, obviously at one point we're going to end up fucking blowing each other up. And our best bet is to create a class of human that could potentially survive this. It's not even creating a new weapon. It's not even like, let's blow everybody else off the map. It's you know, let's make sure we can survive nuclear fallout. But
some of us can.
Some of us, maybe. A year later, or 9 months later, they end up having a son, and he's born on, of course, the 10-year anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. And minutes after his birth, suddenly his parents spontaneously combust. Cut to 1990. He's now Brad Dourif. He's grown into Brad Dourif. A put upon man,
driving a 1955's car,
who drives what looks like, I don't know if you guys are familiar. Jim, you said you've never read a book, but I meant to attach it to the Google Docs. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same car from the first edition cover of Revolutionary Road. I don't know. I know nothing about cars, but it's a classic. It's just the most 1950s looking car you could possibly imagine. Folks, conjure that in your mind. But
it's red.
Yeah, one of the things I like about, I think it has like white wall tires too. I don't know. Folks, picture it in your mind. You guys can conjure this. It's got the fins. One of the things I really like about the movie is that like from the very beginning, the world seems to be out to get Brad Dourif. And then as the movie goes on, you realize, oh, everybody is in on this conspircy against him. Literally,
They literally all are. Yeah.
Maybe we don't confirm it with everybody, but it's possible that even like the students we see early on are in on Project
They're like
Samson
being
and have
paid
been, like,
to be
tracking
terrible
him.
to him.
Because everybody fucking hates this guy. He's giving he's like auditioning for some Shakespeare or like I don't know, like just showing off a scene for like students, and they're like, wow, that really sucked. You stink. And then he goes to lunch with his ex-wife, who is just like who's leasing their house that they agreed to sell, and she's already eaten. She says something like, oh, I couldn't wait. And he's like, oh, but I was on time. All of the waiters are giving him shit, including like a guy who we don't even see, who's like from off screen talking to him. He's just constantly put upon.
Well, they make him pay the bill too.
She makes him pay the bill. He's been getting cucked by his doctor. Yeah, it's truly nuts. And then all of a sudden he starts to spark in the restaurant after his wife makes him pay this bill. He suddenly briefly spontaneously combusts. And I think that's when the performance really kicks into high gear, because his like pained yelps are so great. He's a great screamer, up there with the best, a scream king, if you will. And even when he walks into the bathroom, there's that shot where it looks like a guy is about to set him on fire. Like he's often like within the frame, portrayed in such a way in which people are sort of I don't know, seemingly like
he's
antagonistic
like in proximity to fire, or
Also, every set in this movie is amazing.
Yes.
Every dollar is on screen. No set is believable as like what a place would really look like.
No.
His girlfriend, who looks to me exactly like Hillary Clinton, looks and dresses a lot like Hillary Clinton did in this era. Like, I don't know, the famous video of her and Bill that Adam Curtis always uses. I swear to God, she's wearing something with like the same shoulder pads and has like a very similar face. Anyway, she is in this apartment where everything is neon. I don't know what you call this aesthetic, but he should have known she was internet, because
there's no name for that aesthetic, Bennett, because no one has ever had that aesthetic.
No one has ever had it.
It's never existed outside of this one room.
I think Ignatiy Vishnevetsky said something like, it wouldn't be believable in like a Nicholas Winding Refn movie. You would be like, no one lives like this. But people basically like, it's his birthday, right? I guess, I don't know, what is he turning, like 30, 40 maybe, and there's a nuclear plant that's opening. It's just gotten its reactor, and they also refer to that as its birthday. Like all of these forces seem to be lining up, and all sorts of people around town are spontaneously combusting. And I love this radio host they call into, who seems to be both a medium and just an expert in all things spooky and scary, because he's the one who introduces us in the present day storyline to the concept of spontaneous combustion, and more importantly, introduces Dourif to the concept. I don't know, this much like Lifeforce, really, really like starts becoming several movies in one very quickly. Yeah. Partially because we spend, I think, almost like 15-20 minutes with Dourif's parents in the past. This movie uses a newsreel to supply exposition, which is the best way ever to supply exposition. I mean, this is it's his Citizen Kane. I gave this 5 stars on Letterboxd fully unironically. I think this is like one of my 50 favorite movies at this point.
It is a beautifully assembled film, right? There's like a lot that happens, but you sort of said it earlier. It's constantly. We sort of are entered into a world. I mentioned earlier that I feel like one of the Tobe Hooper's gifts is he always sort of keeps you a half step up from what's happening. You're like always, it's like he's constantly pulling the rug that you're walking on. And this movie, it's like you're like, are these things happening to Brad Dourif, or is he just, does it just seem like everyone's terrible? Does it just seem like the world is out to get him? But then it is like, oh, it's your birthday. It's the reactor's birthday. It constantly gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until the end, and then it literally explodes.
Yeah, and I mean, even from the first shots, like he starts this movie with a false start. So they're like, all right, let's do the countdown for the bomb, and it doesn't drop. And then he shows the bomb like shaking. It's just like, it's such a great way to start this.
Oh, that whole sequence is so good. The shot of the sun sort of coming over the hill where they're all watching him from the bunker. Did you think that was a mushroom cloud the first time? I did.
Yes,
I guess he obviously means for it to suggest it. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's the movie has a lot of, and I know Lynchian is such a horrible adjective to employ, but I think this is the rare film that actually sort of earns the Lynchian comparisons, because I do think so. I mean, Craig, I know from your Letterboxd ratings that you weren't a fan of Twin Peaks: The Return, but one of the Twin Peaks: The Return sort of like central themes is like the idea that like the episode 8 is all about
that's a 5-star episode.
It's all about the dropping of the atomic bomb, sort of like setting all these cosmic forces into motion and like leading to the creation of Bob. And like I don't know, this feels like of a piece with that. And in addition to like the atomic bomb sort of having poisoned everything, there's a sense that like electricity in this is even evil.
Yeah.
Because like not only can Dourif spontaneously combust, but he can like do it through the phone, and like occasionally
he can force other people to do it. Yeah,
and occasionally he can like. Occasionally he can even control electricity, including like during the climax when all the like lights are flickering on and off. And I don't know, I feel like the neon stuff is really supposed to be like drawing our attention to all of this like technology that this like power runs through.
Well, there's also, Bennett, at the beginning, everyone has either pro or anti-nuclear power bands on their arms, right? We're introduced to the idea of nuclear power being either good or evil, but definitely
hot button, certainly.
Potent. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, I and then obviously the 50s fetishism is in keeping with Lynch's whole of. Yeah, I don't know. I not to make this about Twin Peaks: The Return, but I mean, come on. I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked to learn that David Lynch has seen Spontaneous Combustion.
Yeah, I would be a little surprised to hear that he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I really another thing Hooper does really well in both films is his use of shadow, and I think it's especially interesting here in the first scene in the hospital when David's born. We get a couple of really, really like vivid, clear silhouettes. The whole hospital room seems like really, really sunny outside or something. And it feels like it has to be a choice, all the shadows we see. And it reminded me of the silhouettes that were apparently created when the bomb was dropped, which I only learned about from Watchmen. But I don't know, it has to be a choice that we get these these silhouettes so clearly. There's David right when he's born. Yeah. There's his mother when she's singing, and then there's his father when he gives him the merry-go-round. And I also love just the ominous line of "It's so great what they're doing with plastic." So good.
Yeah, weirdly dark. There's also the main bad guy. I don't remember his name. The like older guy who conspired to create Brad Dourif is. For the first 6 times we see him completely concealed in shadow. It feels like it's doing one of those things where it's going to be like either it's going to be one scene in and it's a famous actor, or like it's going to be really important later that we didn't know what his face looked like. But it's neither of those things. He just is shown entirely in shadow for the first 45 minutes of the movie, and then eventually Brad Dourif gets in a limousine and he's just sitting there and we see his face. And I don't 100% understand how that reveal got there or panned out that way, but it is super fascinating the way that he sort of shows him completely enshrouded in darkness in a very sort of conspicuous way for a good portion of the film.
I think too that the really quick escalation of the plot is in keeping with just the degradation of Dourif's both mind and body. Like one of the key things about the spontaneous combustion is that like he doesn't heal. It's like it's the opposite of like Wolverine in the claws. Like he is just constantly having to like bandage himself up.
He just gets
than, like,
worse and worse,
re-injuring. Yeah. And it happens like pretty quickly. Like he combusts at the restaurant, and then I think within 10 minutes he's like burning John Landis to death on the phone. Yeah. Which is an incredible sequence. So good. And not just because it's hilarious to see one of Hollywood's like eminent manslaughterers and blowhards get like burned, but it's such a wild sequence. They call into the aforementioned radio host, and he senses, it seems like he is actually a medium because he seems to sense things about David, and then like a scientist who is also on Project Samson calls in. Dourif like accidentally hangs up because his birthmark starts to grow. I'll say one area where the film's like special effects lose me is initially the birthmark is like the birthmark is initially raised. It looks like a weird like nipple sort of a thing, and then as it's growing throughout the film, it's very clearly painted on. There's no texture to it or anything. But he calls back in, and like Landis won't put him through. Landis is, I guess, like a producer or something, and he starts shooting fire through the phone that comes out of like Landis's mouth, starts coming out of like his legs and arms, and Landis gets totally on fire. And here's where like the pungency and like the goopiness of Hooper's filmmaking is at its best. Landis, when he's on fire, like slams against the wall of the recording booth and leaves behind this like smear. Oh, it's revolting. Oh, it's so good. And the degradation on Dourif is so great too, for what couldn't have been like a very large makeup budget.
No.
Really great. Oh, and during that scene, he starts to shoot out like black goop. I feel like the special effects are very in keeping with the sort of handmade quality of like the special effects you'd see in like a Lynch film even now, or in something like Twin Peaks: The Return. I think this is Hooper's most Lynchian film.
I think my favorite part of the whole movie is when the fire just starts shooting out of the center of his arm, and they're like trying to pour water on it, and he's like, no, it makes it worse.
It keeps making it worse. Yeah. And there's the seed
Because
sewn
it's
for that too. His mean, I guess it is supposed to be electrical maybe. Yeah, his mean doctor gets burned, and we find out that he like burned to death in like a shower with it running.
Oh yeah.
So like, his doctor's another guy that's a complete dick to him. He's like, I think I'm sick, and he's like,
everybody
just always trying to get out sick.
I'm going back to this idea that I feel like Tobe Hooper is always sort of like keeping you confused. When we're introduced to Brad Dourif as an adult, it is the first thing we see of him is when he's auditioning for that play. And so I briefly was like, am I to believe he's a high schooler? Because
my girlfriend thought the same thing. She's like, why
movies
is he 40
sometimes
years
cast
old?
35-year-old as high schoolers. You know what I mean? So I was like, is he a high schooler now? And then it took me 4 minutes to figure out that he was a teacher. I don't know. It's everything is like a little bit confusing.
Yeah, they have like the hanging out in the hallway after school moment. It's like, wait, are they teachers or students?
Yeah. Who are these people? What's happening? Why are other students? Why do they feel so free to be so mean to this man unless he's also a student?
Imagine like saying that to your high school teacher, like, "Wow, you really suck."
Yeah.
Oh, it's so funny. I think besides maybe the Landis thing, I think my favorite sequence in the film, and among my favorite in Hooper's filmography, is that great scene when he's like looking into the fireplace, when he sort of like sees into his past after the spontaneous combustion has started to happen. Hooper is like a far better technician, I think, that people give him credit for too, or at least like a master of I don't know, just the master of the montage. It's this really like emotionally kind of wrenching sequence of him seeing like the family home movies, and just like flickering editing that kind of makes it look like film going through a projector, with the kind of cheesy flame effects that we've seen through the opening credits. So once again, it's like Hooper combining, I don't know, seemingly such competing sensibilities into something I think both kind of goofy and really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's definitely the most moving sequence I could think of in a Hooper film.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing else immediately springs to mind.
Yeah, moving isn't usually what he's going for.
Yeah, it's not really what he's known for.
So one quote from Tobe Hooper that I really loved, he did an interview with Mick Garris on his YouTube show, and he asked him about Texas Chain Saw Massacre and why it's such a powerfully emotional like horror to it. And Hooper's response was, the best illustration of insanity is to show normality in an insane situation. Like, that is such a great quote about horror. So how do you feel, especially Brad Dourif, like how does that fit into this movie?
That's interesting. I think some of it is like part and parcel with the kind of conspiracy going on around him, is that for a long time, everyone has to pretend like nothing's going on. His doctors have to keep saying stuff like, oh, have you been taking your migraine medication? And stuff like that. I think that's the enforcement of normality onto things. I feel like that comes across more strongly in Lifeforce, where we have so many people talking about such patently ludicrous things in such a matter-of-fact way. Yeah. And yeah, it's something you see through so many of Hooper's films. He's got so many famous like dinner scenes. He's got so many famous scenes of like the domestic space kind of perverted like that. But yeah, I think in the case of Spontaneous Combustion and Dourif, I think it's more represented in how other people approach him. He seems a little off, a little unhinged from the beginning.
Yeah, that's why I thought this was an interesting quote for this movie, because he almost seems to be the part that is not sane, because everyone else is just like, well, yeah, you should be taking your pills, but he's being forced into this kind of insane situation.
Well, yeah, it's in most Tobe Hooper movies, I might be wrong on this, but in most of them, the main person we're following, and I guess this isn't true with something like Texas Chainsaw, because we're technically following the like woman who ended up there, but the person who the audience is sort of following the most is like an aggressor, is a person who's like sort of in control in a space where things, or like is trying to maintain control in a space where things are spiraling out of control, right? But in this movie, it's sort of flipped on its head a little bit. It's Brad Dourif is a victim from moment one in this film, right? He doesn't know how. I think that's the other thing, is that usually in Tobe Hooper movies, and most of the ones that I can think of, what is happening is clear to everybody, right? There might be moments where they're like, oh no, this man wants to eat me. I just figured that out, right? But for broadly, everyone's like, I have entered this carnival. I'm staying inside this fun house, and I see what's happening in it, and I am and now I'm dealing with that, right? But this movie, I want to say a big chunk of it, but it honestly does happen pretty quickly once it starts happening. Brad Dourif is like, I think I'm living a normal life, and then everything crumbles around him to be like, it's almost like Truman Show style, right? Where he's like, oh, literally everything I've ever known has been put here, but he doesn't find out as quickly as he doesn't just sail into the sky, right? He sort of finds out piece by piece. He's like, oh, everything is against me. My doctor's against me. Oh, even my girlfriend is against me. It falls out in chunks.
And it's like if finding out about the Truman Show resulted in all of the like actors in the Truman Show then like pulling out guns and knives.
Yeah, then trying to murder you.
as soon as Dourif has like figured it out, and as soon as he's gone from being like scared to being angry, he's in confrontations with literally everyone. That kindly old security guard pulls a gun on him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, I've known you for so long. They're like clearly friendly with each other, and he's like, I'm gonna have to murder you.
So one other quote I really like from that same interview is Tobe Hooper said that film's effect is similar to music, and he said he feels he's doing a good job if his films feel like music. I don't know how to unpack that myself, so I'm throwing that one to you too.
I think there is a lot. I mentioned earlier that I think one of his big strengths is rhythm, right?
Yeah.
I think he is very rhythmic. And Bennett, you mentioned that one of the things that consistently is very good in his films is the sense of montage, right? Which is the thing that sort of the most immediate thing that film and music have in common that other arts don't is time, right? I talk about this all the time in my classes, but they're sort of the only two arts. I don't really include theater because it's interactive in a way that neither of these is, but they're the only two arts that sort of control the audience's experience through time, right? If you have a painting on the wall, people go look at it, they spend as much time as they want looking at it, they noodle over it, whatever parts they want, or they like blow past it, right? It's their choice. But with a movie or with music, you're in control of the audience's experience temporally. And I think a lot of films treat that as sort of a happenstantial, right? They're like, oh, we're going to get through this quickly, or we're going to get through this slowly. But they don't really put a heavy emphasis on like the beat by beat control of that time. And Tobe Hooper absolutely does in all of his films. He's very concerned with sort of the rhythmic and tempo based elements of everything that's happening, which I think he's often using to sort of throw you off in ways that a lot of filmmakers don't. That's the way that I sort of would unpack that. I'm sure there might be other things that means to him, right? There's also sort of ideas of like motif and of competing threads, right? One of the things you get in music is sort of like melodies and harmonies and like counter melodies and stuff. And he is probably doing something with that, although I don't know. And as we've sort of mentioned, a lot of these films come off as structured symphonically, right? Like there's a series of movements rather than just it's not like a rock song that starts and ends. It's like a piece that has like 5 movements that then tie into each other somehow, right? At least Lifeforce is definitely that.
Yeah, or like tracks on an album, I guess is maybe how I would
Sure.
think about it. If you have the Lifeforce
Sure,
album,
if you want to go lowbrow with it.
Sorry, I know nothing about music.
I'm talking
so
about Mahler over here.
I know absolutely nothing about music or music theory or anything, and I, as unimpeachably excellent as my taste in movies is, my taste in music is just as dog shit. So I really I have no insight into like any aspect of the world of music. I mean, I was gonna say for me that just as someone who knows nothing about music and often has to appreciate it on just sort of like an instinctive level. I don't know, Hooper's films, even if you aren't like trying to like pick them apart and understand why they work, because oftentimes I think that gesture would be pretty unsatisfying.
Sure.
I think you can still kind of like feel them on that that instinct, gut level that I do as someone who doesn't understand music and only listens to it, as emotion.
That's fair. Yeah, a lot of like what feels good about, in particular, like rock music, right? Things that are a live band or playing, or not necessarily live, but a band playing together rather than like techno, is that sort of not interactivity with the audience, obviously, but interactivity with each other, right? There's that element of like people coming together, creating a thing that's obviously planned out, but like sort of is is evolving in the moment and is being created live in studio, right? There's like they're working together to make a thing and interacting and playing off of each other, which his movies feel sort of alive in a similar way to that, right? Like I would compare Tobe Hooper movies to loud rock. You know, if I was going to pick a genre of music that they feel like in my heart, I would say it's probably what's I can't think of the name of a single band right now. All I can think of is Ministry, but that's not what I want. Testament is what I'm trying to think of. It's like it feels like sort of like noodly metal to me. His movies. There's like an aliveness and a joy. Like if you watch a David Fincher movie, it sounds like it's like sedate Nine Inch Nails, right? It's programmed. It's hitting beats that feel like they could have been made by a robot. It's very quantized. But Tobe Hooper, it constantly feels like it could go off the rails.
Yeah, right, in the best way. Yeah, no, I mean, and Fincher, I mean, he's the go-to example for that sort of like soulless, programmatic movie for a reason. He's the antithesis of Hooper to me.
So, after talking about, briefly Tobe Hooper's career as a whole, I think so many people get caught up on he did Texas Chainsaw and Poltergeist, but they kind of ignore everything else. How do you recommend for people who might not be completely open to some of his weirder stuff? How do you recommend they approach these films?
I just check all of your expectations about what a good movie is supposed to look and feel like at the door, what a horror movie is supposed to look and feel like at the door. You got to get kind of out of those isms and be ready to be kind of shaken out of your comfort zone,
I always try to encourage anyone who's watching anything that's sort of outside of their normal wheelhouse, or really anyone who's watching any movie, to just sort of go in and let the movie tell you how to watch it, right? Because most movies communicate in similar ways. So it's easy to be like, I know how this movie's going to talk to me, but some movies don't. Some movies are taking a different path into your brain. And if you're going in saying, I know how I'm going to watch this movie, then you're never going to have a good time watching a movie that's taking an alternate pathway. If you go into the movie and you're saying, I'm going to let this movie tell me how to watch it, then I think any Tobe Hooper movie is going to be a joyful experience to you. That they're all meandering around, taking a slightly different path than you may be used to if you mostly watch traditionally made films. But they're all doing what they're doing with a high degree of excellence.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. I would just say, don't remove any and all preconceived notions, and don't let yourself believe that you're at all smarter or better than the film, or that any critic who has contributed to its low Metacritic score is at all smarter or better than the film. And let it tell you how to watch it, because I think
it's not doing it wrong. Whatever you think it's doing wrong, it's not. You're just receiving it incorrectly.
I mean, I think that's the right way to watch films in general, is just to acknowledge that the film is better than you. It's smarter than you.
Humble yourself to the cinematic experience, man.
Exactly.
It's doing what it's supposed to do.
All right, so I think we're at that time. Let's put these films head to head. Lifeforce versus Spontaneous Combustion. Which one are you picking?
I mean, I feel like Bennett has said a lot of things that have endeared me even more to Spontaneous Combustion than I already was, but I'm sticking with Lifeforce as it's who I brung to the dance, and it's who I'm gonna lead the dance with.
I'm gonna have to stick with Spontaneous Combustion as well. I mean, I really like Lifeforce. It's jumped up my Hooper ranking significantly, but I think it has some of the same problems that a movie it's superficially similar to 2001 has, in that it's tough to latch on to one of its characters. It's got a real Keir Dalia problem with all of its leading men. You have Stewart eventually, but he comes in a little late. Yeah. And I don't know. I think Spontaneous Combustion really benefits from having Brad Dourif at its center. And I think what I go to Hooper for in general is the goopiness and the griminess. And while there's some of that to spare in Lifeforce, just the yellow pus and the shooting black blood coming out of his arm in Spontaneous Combustion is just such wonderful grotesquerie. And it's exactly what you want from the guy who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's a more raw, pure Hooper. I think if someone who was listening to this was like, I've never seen a Hooper movie other than Texas Chainsaw, they should definitely go the Spontaneous Combustion route.
Yeah, I think I probably would go with Lifeforce because I
Yeah.
rewatched both of them recently, and Lifeforce took a much bigger jump. Because the first time I saw Lifeforce, I was like, "This is really good." Then the second time, I was like, "What didn't I see the first time?" I loved it to death. Spontaneous Combustion is a ton of fun. Like I have nothing bad to say about it in the slightest. But Lifeforce is just that's the real deal to me.
Really, though, if someone's looking for an entry point, just pick any movie, you know? Even if you pick like a weird, like we said, like a tertiary, like Toolbox Murders, if you want to jump in there, you'll do well with it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be sad.
Yeah, even if you don't agree that they're good, I think you'll agree that they're singular.
Yeah,
and that they give you like a lot to at least look at.
All right, so do you guys have any final thoughts about either of these films or Tobe Hooper as a whole?
I'll just say that he's a filmmaker who has been kind of perpetually sold short. If you know one thing about Tobe Hooper besides the fact that he directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's probably that people don't think he directed Poltergeist. I think it's promising that people on like Film Twitter and Letterboxd really, really seem to go to bat for him, and I hope that only continues in the coming years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's considered like one of the big horror dudes, but also just for basically one movie. But I think he deserves a little bit more attention than that. He is as Bennett said 3 hours ago when we started. It's even if his movies aren't cohering, even if they aren't doing a thing that is broadly, they're not creating a whole that is to your liking. They're 100% doing 1,000 little things that are delightful. They're just like gardens of miniature delights all the way across every single one of them. So I think there's no Tobe Hooper that isn't worth consuming.
Well, I think that wraps it up perfectly. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast having you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Bennett, as always, good seeing you again. Thanks for joining us.
Always happy to be here. And Jim, good to talk to you sort of at length.
Yeah, same.
For the first time.
Same.
Yeah, we have a lot more October horror coming your way. We'll get through this. We'll get through it somehow. But yeah, we are looking at the American greats for this year on Split Picks. So I think up next is John Carpenter. It's going to be a good time. Thank you for listening. I'm Craig Wright. This is Split Picks. And we'll be back soon.
Shit. They're gonna throw me in the brig in this split tooth compound.